that's the 3 months that they have summer, and the rest of it's like crap.
Okay, we are all set.
Okay, well, thanks again for being here, Jack. We really appreciate it and appreciate the time you've spent with us. And again, if you could look at the big red one. And the other thing is, when I ask you a question, the visitors won't be hearing my question. So if you could incorporate the answer or incorporate my question into your answer. For instance, if I ask you, why did you join the Army, you'll say, I joined
In the Army because of,
Yeah,
right.
yeah. So we're just going to start out with, what was the highest rank you served in the 1st Division?
My highest rank in the 1st Division was Master Sergeant, E8.
Okay, and can you tell us why did you join the Army?
I joined the Army initially because I wasn't going as fast or as far as I wanted to in college, and I saw a way to get college paid for, plus get some job experience, and then come back and get the GI Bill and college education paid off.
Right, and so you enlisted to pay off college loans, you say, and paid for college, but you stayed in the Army and the Reserves for 30 years. Why?
I stayed in the Army for, actually, it was 30 years and 8 months because I found out that I liked it, I was good at it. There was opportunities far and away above my initial contract that I signed up for, and I saw a way to possibly contribute more than my other family members did earlier.
Okay, and in, I think it was 2006, you were called up from the Active Guard Reserve as an intelligence analyst. How did you feel about being called up from the reserve?
Being called up in 2006, it was pretty much inevitable because the active duty soldiers were pretty stretched thin, and we knew we had assets in the reserve component, the Guard and the Army Reserve, that we could use to fill in where we had gaps different places. So I was fine with it. The reserve side of intelligence work pretty much is not intelligence work. It's administrative, paperwork, security clearances, and those kind of things. If I deployed, I was going to be able to use my intelligence skills that I learned in school in a practical manner that I was actually trained for. So I was pretty happy about it.
Okay, and I think this speaks to why do you believe you were chosen to go to Iraq? And if you could tell the big red one your story.
Well, I feel that I was selected to go to Iraq. As a matter of fact, I was selected in the orders by name. There was only 2 of us in the order that was selected by name because I had the experience and the rank that they needed to perform a task in theater successfully without any kind of a problem, physical or administrative. Plus, I hadn't been deployed for 10 years, so I think I was next one up on the bubble.
Okay, and what was your training like? What kind of training did you receive for Operation Iraqi Freedom?
For Operation Iraqi Freedom, the training went in several phases. Some of it was just administrative processing, but then we had a raft of tactical training that we did at North Fort Hood, room clearing, all kinds of weapons, qualification training, training on improvised explosive devices, convoy operations, down to combat life-saving, which is basically a medic without the qualifications of a medic, just a first responder type of a thing. Vehicle operations, radios, just a whole gamut of what you need to know in a combat environment.
Okay, and then when you arrived in Iraq, what kind of specialty training did you receive when you got there?
Basically, when we arrived in Iraq, we got refresher training on everything that we'd already had. We went to the Counterinsurgency Academy at Taji, just north of Baghdad, and had about a week of more intense training on the radios, not so much on the vehicles, not so much on the weapons, but cultures, how to get along with your folks that you were going to be advising, and that type of thing.
And so, you said there was some cultural training. What was that like?
The cultural training we received was necessarily not in depth or not as well as it could have been done. But given the time constraints, they gave us basically a brief history of the tribes in the area, the religious rivalries, shall we say, the tribal rivalries, and who we were supposed to be assisting and how to assist them without insulting them or creating more of a problem. Because we were actually going to be guests in their country, and in fact guests not only in their country, but in their homes and in their FOBs, their forward operating bases.
Okay, Jack.
All right.
Back to Iraq.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you got to
I'm
pay me per
sorry.
diem.
Yeah, yeah. Tell the Big Red One what your primary mission in Iraq was.
My mission itself, or the mission of the training team? Gotcha.
What your mission, what your unit was, you were with, what you were
Okay.
there for. What was your mission in Iraq?
All right. Our mission in Iraq, I was with the American Military Transition Team for the 4th Brigade of the 1st Iraqi Army Division. And our mission was to advise the different staff sections, maneuver, field artillery or fires, intelligence, logistics, and administration, on how to improve their operations, make them actually efficient, make sure their troops were paid, make sure their benefits were up to date, that they had supplies, that they can conduct successful operations against the insurgents and survive on the battlefield.
Okay, can you explain why your team was called Tip of the Spear?
Well, all the MITs were called the tip of the spear because the conventional Army units that were sent into the theater were basically what they call Big Army. And Big Army is a large conventional formation basically organized in order to fight a conventional fight. We were the tip of the spear because we were advising the Iraqis on the one hand, but on the other hand, we were supporting them in their efforts to be the Iraqi face of the fight against the insurgents. So we were way forward of any of the Army or Marine conventional units that were in theater, and oftentimes isolated.
Can I ask a question? So go back to the primary mission. The primary mission of the MITs, though, were to what?
Advise.
Advise and hand over.
We wanted to get the Iraqis to realize that since they had years and years of fighting under British supervision and then under Russian tutelage, we wanted to take that history and show them that they could actually do it better and more efficiently and be more successful if they actually applied those rules and took the fight to the enemy, which they ended up eventually doing a little better than when we first got in theater, at least.
But make the point that the purpose was, it was an exit strategy.
It was. The MIT purpose was basically to work ourselves out of a job. The MIT concept was almost a special forces training concept where we're training a foreign military. The purpose in training a foreign military, of course, is to make sure that they can do the job without you so that you can then leave theater and the country will be in good hands with the new military.
And who was the enemy, Jack?
That's a difficult question to answer. The enemy in Iraq, depending on where you were either Sunni or Shia insurgents. It was more of a tribal rivalry, if you will, but it was supported a lot by people like out-of-state operators like Hezbollah and Iran.
And where were they?
Where the insurgents were?
Mm-hmm.
Well, It's kind of like Chairman Mao said years ago in his revolution, the insurgents were like the fish in the sea. They were everywhere. The insurgents dressed like the natives, very hard to tell them apart. You just had to see about turning them into friends rather than disgruntled citizens so that they could work with you instead of against you.
Mm-hmm. And we touched on this before, but I'm going to ask you again. I don't think people realize the enormity of the depth and nuances of working with MIT. You said you trained in Iraqi language, culture as part of MIT. What specialty training did you receive to work with the Iraqi Army?
In order to work with the Iraqi Army, a lot of our training centered on learning their language, their customs, their hierarchies as far as tribes and clans and religious, Sunni versus Shia, the different tribes, different areas. They didn't have a real notion of nationhood. As Americans particularly consider themselves as Americans first, not Illinoisans or Wisconsinites or people from Chicago or from Cook County. The tribal ties are very strong in Iraq, so we had to be cognizant of that and try not to insult them in any way. Then there was the respect as far as their when we greeted our Iraqi counterparts, we learned to put our right hand over our heart and bow a little bit, use some key Iraqi phrases like good morning or thank you or how can I help you and how are we doing today, to remember that the Iraqis value meetings much more than making instant snap decisions. We would have to sit down for hours of drinking tea, their chai, under not necessarily sanitary conditions. They'd bring out cookies or canned sodas for the Americans, and then after a couple meetings, we'd get down to where they would be able to make a decision about an operation.
Okay. Dave, is there one still up there?
Yeah.
Okay, great. You were assigned to the intelligence for the Iraqi assistance group. What were your duties?
As the second intelligence advisor, we also had a lieutenant colonel who was the primary advisor. I was responsible for connecting with perimeter security on the 4 operating bases upon which we operated, looking up convoy information, making sure that we're using the safest routes, talking to my counterparts and seeing if they had any intelligence on any ongoing operations that we needed to be aware of in the area. We didn't want to step on any other units' toes. If they were doing something in the area, we didn't want to go and blow through their operation and maybe compromise security on them. I also was in charge of the detainee program and scanning them for what they call BATS system. It's a biometric a set where you take their fingerprint and their eye ball and download it into a database and then compare it to known insurgents that have already been captured and see if this is the same guy who's now using a different name.
And what was it like working with and training the Iraqi Army?
Working with and training the Iraqi Army was interesting in a way, is because as Americans we tend to strive for perfection. One of the things in the cultural part and the awareness of how the Iraqi operates is to realize that they don't strive for perfection. It may be part of their religion or it may just be part of their military culture, but if it's a solution that works for them, that maybe it's not a 100% solution, if it's a 60% solution, but they're content with it, then it's a good solution for them and they're not going to push for anything better. They're not going to try for perfection. An American without the proper cultural training would be pulling his hair out at that point.
What did the Iraqi Army expect from the Americans?
I think mostly what the Iraqi Army expected from us is help in logistics, that is, bringing them, making sure they had supplies, meaning fuel, foodstuffs, medical supplies, vehicles, equipment, that type of thing. They weren't as concerned over the administrative part, where they had to maintain rosters of their people, make sure that each of their soldiers got paid all the time, they had the proper amount of leave. But the material items that would help them continue the fight, they were very concerned about that, and we were able to assist them in obtaining fuel and the necessary supplies for them.
How did you build trust with them?
In order to build trust, we had several social get-togethers. They would bring some food, we would cater some food, we would pay for it. And then we would sit down and discuss things at length. We had daily meetings. My commander, I know, had turned into nightly meetings because it was cooler that way. And he would have discussions. I would go over to my counterpart in the S2 and G2 section and discuss operations, what they wanted to do, what they knew about the area, if they knew of anything that would help facilitate securing the area, removing the unrest, removing the IEDs, and securing the population. And we discuss that on a nightly basis, and then have weekly meetings as far as prioritizing operations that they could do and we could support.
And Jack, tell us what your day-to-day looked like.
Ooh. Day to day, the life of a military transition team probably consisted of one or two guys in the Tactical Operations Center monitoring the radio and watching the map and plotting operations on that. The rest of us probably had a battlefield circulation tour scheduled, where we would get a convoy up, no less than 3 vehicles, fully armored, fully gunned, set up to leave early in the morning. So you do your preparations and checks on the vehicles and on the weapon systems, load out with your body armor and all your weapons and electronic gear, and then we would drive to different outposts, combat outposts throughout our sector, visiting with the commanders and the soldiers. These are Iraqis and Americans both, and trying to gain information about how the atmosphere is, just gaining atmospherics pretty much. That would sometimes lead us to other operations. Sometimes it would, lead us to, there was a problem so-and-so place. These guys need a well. These folks need a bridge. And then we would bring it back. And if we didn't have the capabilities organically, then we could bump that up to our higher command and let them know that we would like that to be a priority, and then they would, put it on their list of things to do. Days would generally end about 1800. We'd do our meetings and wrap-ups, and depending on whether we were called out again for an IED strike or small arms attack or anything, the rest of the night, which is generally ours.
And how did you view the Iraqi army? Were they what you expected?
Well, I view the Iraqi army, since I'd been watching the Iraq conflict since its inception, kind of realistically. I knew that they were not really a world-class weapons system, although we did have some good experience, or they had some good experience during the Gulf War. But they had a large number army, but not a large quality army. They'd gone through too many Soviet and British iterations, and the Sunni versus Shia friction that was created in the armed services didn't lead to very much efficiency. So I pretty much knew that we had a job ahead of us.
And how did the Iraqi army receive MIT?
I think the Iraqis received MIT as this is something that they have to put up with in order to maintain their supplies and their support, and ultimately they could decide whether they're going to accept or reject our advice. Towards the end of our tour, they actually did start accepting our advice, and in fact did some improvement.
Was there corruption in the Iraqi system, Jeff?
Yes, there was corruption in the Iraqi system. There was a great deal of corruption in the Iraqi system. There was always talk of the division commander and the brigade commander in our Iraqi division basically siphoning off the fuel that we gave them, the American fuel, for their vehicles and selling it at a gas station so that they could, earn an extra profit. Whether that was even looked into or whether that was deemed injurious to our relationship, I'm not sure. But we never went into that. That went into the too hard to do box.
I think you were telling us how that the Iraqi army was paid in cash. Is that correct? And then what would happen after that?
During the period I was there, the Iraqi government or economy did not have an operating banking system. It was impossible for them to be paid, for instance, by direct deposit, which our army went to several years ago. They would pay 1/3 of their privates, their soldiers, in cash every month, and then they would send them off on Jaza, which is basically leave, home leave. And they put them on a bus, they'd go off home, they'd take their wages to their wives or families, they'd go pay their bills, and then between a week to 2 weeks later, most of them would show back up at the FOB. The following month, they'd repeat the process with another third and then another third. It was very inefficient. It was impossible to pretty much regulate because the lump sum for the X amount of soldiers that we had went to the battalion commanders. The battalion commanders were then to parcel out the money to their soldiers. And without proper accounting, you don't know where that money went. We're never sure.
Right. Did you work with interpreters while you were there?
We did work with interpreters. Our interpreters were all native Iraqis. We did have one Kurd from the northeast section of Iraq. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, all of our interpreters were actually Canadian citizens who volunteered to go back to Iraq and be interpreters. We had one super interpreter whose name was Alex, and he was the only one of our interpreters that could simultaneously translate. He was just a treasure. We tried to keep him around us a lot.
Did the interpreters live with you?
The interpreter did live with us, not in our same buildings, but generally in the building next door or in the wing next door. We made sure that they had the same facilities, they got to eat the same food, although most of the time they made their own food. Went with us on operations, wore the same uniforms we did, all that kind of good stuff.
Could you trust them?
The question should be probably not could we trust them, but did we trust them?
Okay. Did you trust the interpreters?
About 70%. We only trusted them as far as we needed to. The interpreters were not armed. We didn't allow them to go around armed, just because there was always a chance that their loyalties, like I said, were with their tribe or with their village or their clan and not with the nation of Iraq that we were trying to support.
And you said you reviewed and monitor a lot of intelligence. How did you gather intelligence on the insurgents?
In order to gather insurgent intelligence, basically I would go through my Iraqi S2 folks. My Iraqi NCOs in the intelligence shop were former officers under Saddam. They had all the British and Soviet training in intelligence. They were really very, very good. They had people out in the villages, out in the bazaars, out in the towns that they could get human intelligence from. And over there, as I had found out earlier in Bosnia, the human intelligence piece oftentimes is more accurate than all the electronic intelligence and spreadsheets that you can put together. So I relied a lot on my Iraqi folks in order to get a lot of good information that was actionable. On the American side, we always had a computer, a classified computer that we could delve into. We could pull information off of that as needed.
And how did you verify the intelligence you received? Could you verify it?
Sometimes we could not verify the intelligence. A lot of the times the American intel that we got was easily verified because it's graded from A1 to F6. A1 being the absolute best iron ore. The Iraqi stuff, sometimes we could verify with multiple sources. We'd get another source to chime in and say the same thing, give us the same information, similar information, and we can go back and forth with that. And then we'd have a meeting and hash it out. Is it worth it? Is it good enough to act on, or can we just file that away until we get more information and use it in the future?
Was it frustrating?
It was frustrating every day. You have to understand that we did not grow up speaking Arabic or Iraqi. So just the difference in language is enough to be very frustrated, because you can't learn it fast enough. You're only deployed for 12 months boots on the ground. It's impossible to learn that language that quickly. Given the different cultures and mindsets and religions, there was always room for a lot of frustration. Most of our MIT team members, however, were older, more mature, and able to make the decisions and keep up with the frustration level so that it didn't overpower us and we could still do our job.
You talked earlier about the use of biometrics. Did that work for you?
The biometrics didn't really work for us that well. I don't think that our database was 100% up to date, nor did we have the most up-to-date equipment to use the biometrics with. I'm pretty sure that the set that I was working with was a couple generations older than the stuff that was there, say, beginning of 2007, when the new surge started in Baghdad.
Can you describe the biometric process?
The biometric process, basically, I had a handheld box and a dedicated computer with a computer line. There was a sight, like a telescopic sight you would have in a rifle. You could put that up to a suspect's eye. Generally, you had to use your one hand to hold his eyelid up so that he wouldn't blink, and center that on the eye, take a picture or a scan of it, save it to the computer, and then on a separate little keypad, you would have a place for his index fingerprint. Scan it, download it to the computer, and theoretically the computer was supposed to go through the database that was loaded on the computer and decide whether he was formerly captured, formerly detained, or whether he was perfectly clean. I think a lot of the problem with that, like I say, is that even though we had to update the database monthly by taking it in and having them load a new new database on it so that we could scan through it. I think the equipment was not up to the task.
Okay. So how do you think the Iraqi army viewed the insurgents? Do you know?
I really don't know how the Iraqi army viewed the insurgents other than to realize that they were a disruption of their political life. They upset their economy, they upset their elections, and I'm pretty certain that most Iraqis would almost be happier not having our help, or at least our troops on the ground in Iraq, even though we were giving them more material.
And can you explain that, why they prefer you weren't there?
Why the Iraqis prefer that we weren't there is basically the same reason that the Afghans kind of have an ambivalent view of Americans in their country. They're kind of an insular society. They're not really cosmopolitan. They don't see us as we see ourselves as saviors, but more of assistance to something that they want done. If they don't necessarily want it to be done, or if they want to do it the Iraqi way rather than the American way, then there's going to be some built-in resistance.
Right. What was Route Michigan?
Route Michigan was the main supply route, or MSR, that ran in front of Camp India in Anbar province. It basically went, I think, all the way out west past Habaniya and out to the Syrian border, and all the way east into Baghdad. It was right outside our first base that we got to when we got into Iraq.
And what were the challenges of working on and near Route Michigan?
Well, working on and near Route Michigan, we were only a few hundred meters off of it in our FOB in Camp India, and they had very nice comparatively surroundings and facilities there as far as living quarters. But Route Michigan was so busy with traffic going out west of Fallujah and Habaniya and points west and going east into Baghdad that there was constant IED threats on it. The first few nights that we got there, there was a multi-car convoy, or multi-truck convoy actually, that the insurgents blew up. They blew up the first truck and the last truck and burned the rest. And since we didn't know whether they had any security or whether there was any IEDs left behind, our folks had to take our trucks out and basically sit on there and guard them all night until we got the recovery vehicles out to pull them off the road so they could use it again.
Okay. And you told us about personal locator
beacons.
Yeah, what were those for?
We were issued personal locator beacons, or PLBs. It's a small belt device or handheld in a pouch. And that's pretty much when everybody realized that this is a special forces mission and we were really going to be in jeopardy all the time, every day, every night. What the personal locator beacon did is if we were in danger of getting overrun, if we were in a firefight, if we were in danger of getting captured, if everybody was just getting blown up and killed off, then any one of us could open a PLB and press two buttons simultaneously. What that was supposed to do is send a signal out to every recovery asset in theater within range, everybody that's in Iraq, to come rescue us. And they're supposed to spin everybody up.
Okay. And you just talked about the constant threat of IEDs and mortars and small arms. How did you and the rest of your team handle that?
Well, the constant threat, I think everybody pretty much handled very well. Mostly, I don't think we thought that we were invulnerable as much as we thought this was pretty interesting, and nobody had really gotten shot at before of the folks on any of the teams. So, for instance, we were at Camp India one night and we started getting machine gun and rifle fire from across the street at a large village that was across the way, and several of us climbed up on the roof to watch the colored tracers. Maybe not the best of ideas.
You talked earlier, I think, about the Shia versus Sunni officers and locals and how they've been fighting for 40 years before the Americans arrived. How did this religious rivalry affect what Mitt and the Americans were doing?
The Shia-Sunni rivalry really didn't really affect what we were doing as far as advising the soldiers, as I'm pretty sure that the colonel and all of us just realized that we were soldiers and not part of the religious side of any of it, and we just had to recognize who we were talking to, what sect they belonged to, and try to get them to pull together to improve their lot in the country and to try and get rid of these insurgencies so we could pull out and leave.
Mm-hmm. And let's see, okay. When describing your first combat experience in your questionnaire, you said you were trained, ready, and very calm. Does this speak to the training that the 1st Division provides, the professionalism they have?
I think my reactions to combat reflect on a couple of things. A lot of it is 1st Division training and the heritage. Another part of it, I think, for all of us was all the years that we had spent in the Army prior to being selected for this mission. We had the experience, which generally means you've been trained over and over and over again in basic tasks until they pretty much become muscle memory. Then you're thrust into a situation with a very supportive headquarters with a fine heritage, and you just react in order to not bring discredit upon your friends, your unit, or your family.
Okay, and you stated that not everyone had the attitude or qualifications to be in Iraq. Was that a matter of not having enough personnel or reserves to call upon?
The personnel issues where not everybody was qualified, I think it was a matter of by the time that they started calling our MITs up, they were pretty much, first they were kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel personnel-wise on the active duty side. As far as the reserve side, there was a reserve division from North Carolina that actively lobbied for a military transition team mission, and that had to be augmented with active duty folks who then were placed under the 1st Division and the Iraqi Assistance Group.
Okay, you had a story about how the Iraqi army found an IED and got tired of waiting for someone to come and blew it up. Can you tell us that story?
Yeah, they did twice,
Okay.
2 different ways. The Iraqi army, upon finding an IED on Route Michigan one morning, called it in like they were supposed to. They were probably 5 kilometers down the road from our base, and I got the convoy selection. It was my turn. We got 3 trucks, 2 interpreters, guns, armor, everything, got all ready. Got rolling, went outside the gate, and we're barreling down towards the front gate, going through the HESCO barriers and so on and so forth. And we got just about to the main gate, and we heard a boom. And I verified that with several of the other folks that I had in the truck, and they heard it. Got called back to the Tactical Operations Center, and they said, well, we think we heard something, but we're not sure. Continue mission. So we rolled down to the site of the IED, and there's traffic backed up on both sides. Iraqi Army has traffic stopped. And I got out of the truck with my interpreter and started walking down towards the Iraqi officer in charge. And we exchanged greetings, and I asked the interpreter, I just have him talk to him about the IED, and the officer said, "It's taken care of." I said, "Okay, let's go look at it." I mean, taken care of. The explosive ordnance disposal folks had not been out yet. They could not possibly have beaten our response time. So he took me down to a hole in the median, pretty good sized crater, about 3 feet deep and about 4 feet wide, right in between the two pairs of 2-lane roads. I said, "Where's the IED? All I see is a hole." And the interpreter interpreted. And he said, "Well, I got tired of waiting, so I shot it, blew it up. No more IED." And I'm like, "Okay, start traffic up. We can go home now." So then we went back to the fob, and I made my report to the colonel. He just shook his head.
It sounds like you were in constant negotiation.
Oh, you can't. We were not in a command structure where we could order the Iraqis to do anything. So we had to constantly give a little, get a little type of negotiation. I mean, about everything, about quarters, about operations. There's only 1 or 2 times that I actually saw the Iraqis get intel, come up with an operational plan, and execute it in lightning speed. And that was just shocking. They just went off and did their thing, and it all happened, and it was successful for them. I don't know how. I don't think they ever trained for a contingency that way, but they were able to do it.
Then, Jack, there were the events of April 10th. You were engaged in an 8-hour firefight with insurgents.
I was.
Uh-huh. Can you walk us through how that came about and some of the moment-to-moment decisions that had to be made? I think that our visitors might not realize.
On April 10th of, well, it would have been 07, we had an operation with one of our battalions and their Iraqi counterparts to clear a neighborhood in Al-Fadl, which is part of Baghdad. We started getting reports early in the morning that they had somebody pinned down, they had to pull back because of heavy fire, and then we got a report that they didn't need any help, then a report via the radio that they did need help. And somewhere in the middle of all that, we were still back in our living quarters at that time. I had my hooch next door to the bosses, my colonels, and I kept leaning in. I was like, well, okay, they don't want us now. Well, they do want us now. And I said, all right, we got to make a decision. And the boss said, get the guys up, let's get a convoy, we're going. He, meantime, got on his Iraqi radio and called up the chief of staff of the Iraqi brigade and had him get their quick reaction force. We were going to take them with us, since it was deemed to be an Iraqi operation and they had an Iraqi patrol that was trapped, a squad. They were going to be doing the operation along with us. We got to the area, which wasn't really too far away from our living area at Forward Operating Base Shield in Baghdad. And we staged. We could see an alley in the distance, probably 500 or 600 meters away. Tall buildings, 4 or 5 stories high on either side, a straight alley down to what looked like a dead end. Our battalion was on the far end of that, and we were on radio contact. They were taking fire. They had missed a squad. It was trapped, they thought, in a building somewhere down that alley. They couldn't be more specific. We watched the Iraqis try to go down the alley with a couple of vehicles to rescue their folks 2 or 3 times, and they weren't making any headway. I made a couple suggestions to the colonel, and he decided that we were all going to go down the alley and we're going to go get them. Everybody made sure their weapon systems were ready to go, locked the doors. We put an interpreter in the back of our Humvee along with one Iraqi soldier so that he could identify a building and they would have a voice that they recognized in order to be rescued. And then we started to proceed down the alley. Started taking fire as soon as we came in view, within range. My gunner started returning fire. The other truck's gunners returned fire as well. As we went down the alley, we came across several cross streets. And pretty much all of the cross streets, we took insurgent machine gun fire from the left or from the right. We returned fire, crossing one alley. Then my gunner had entered the second alley when he ran out of bullets in his machine gun. So I had to back up out of the alley, get a can of ammunition up to him. He reloaded. We re-entered the alley. He continued to return fire. We kept going past that alley down a third cross street, and finally got to the house or warehouse or whatever it was, a door, where the lost squad was. And we're able to get them running. They ran out to our vehicles, crawled in the back, and just laid there all happy because now they could get back to their brothers. And that's when I realized that I didn't have any power steering, because my vehicle had been hit multiple times on the left side. It had evidently taken out my air conditioning unit and my power steering. Also had a grenade go off under my left front tire, so it took that tire out. Bullets took out 3 other tires. So I was able to move, but it was very difficult. We continued moving on down the alley trying to get out. As we reached the end of the alley, we made a decision to turn left so that we could basically go around and go back to where we started. And of course I was making wide turns because I had no tires. Tipped over a vendor's cart, pretty much crushed a Toyota Crown that happened to be parked there. And then as we got around at the other end of the block as we were making our loop, we were able to look down another alley and see insurgents with chest rigs, ammo pouches, and AK-47s, and again took them under fire. When we finally stopped back at the place where we started and unloaded all our Iraqi soldiers, I then lost my transmission, so I was hooked up to a tow bar, and I had to get towed back in to repair.
So the interpreters were with you. They put themselves.
We took one.
And so you had an interpreter with you. So they put themselves in danger as well.
Absolutely.
Okay.
The interpreters were basically part of the family. A friend of mine back in Arizona still keeps in touch with his 2 interpreters that he had for his battalion.
Okay. And you also said when you were driving the truck, you weren't going to lose Colonel Cathy. Was having the colonel with you unusual, or?
No, ma'am.
No, and you felt it was your duty to protect him. Tell us about that.
Well, it's kind of hard to explain. When we first got to Fort Hood, I met Colonel Cathy, and he made an executive decision that I was going to be his brigade sergeant major. That put me basically in charge of all the other NCOs and the administrative details and personnel matters in the military transition team that we had. I don't know why. He finally told me why he selected me, but at the time all I could do is just wonder and try and do a good job. He also told me that he wanted me as his driver. So I was always his driver. He pretty much always sat in the commander's seat, unless he didn't go, and then I could command a vehicle. He's a full colonel. He's an '06. He's my responsibility. The truck's my responsibility. I have 43 soldiers, 3 battalions, and a brigade MIT team that are my responsibility. I was getting home. I was getting that truck out of the alley. I was not going to be the only master sergeant in the United States Army to lose a colonel in combat. It's not happening.
Okay, and tell us what happened to your truck.
My truck got destroyed. My truck, as a result of the actions on 10 April, lost 3 tires, air conditioning, power steering, automatic transmission, several vision blocks in the turret. They're probably 3 or 4 inches thick by, I don't know, 12 by 12. Numerous bullet holes, both in the body and chips off the door and the windows on both sides. One of the trucks behind me got one of the front windshields shot up that had to be replaced. We were able to replace everything when we got back to the repair shop, though. Luckily, the week before, we'd had upgraded armor put on all our trucks, so I think that's probably a really, really good thing. I just enjoyed the light show when I saw tracers hitting the truck.
And while you were in the firefight, were you able to communicate with other vehicles or with base?
We did have communication while we were going down the alley. The radio never failed. We had power, we had battery power, radios were still working. The colonel was working the radios. He was working a couple of Apache helicopter gunships above. He was contacting on the Iraqi net, making sure that he was getting some support, supporting fires, that they were helping us out from behind us. He was trying to figure out where our battalion exactly was when we got to the other end of the alley, so we wouldn't run into them and create issues. He's contacting our Tactical Operations Center to let them know updates that, hey, the truck's messed up, but we got our Jundis, our Iraqi privates out. We're heading back. We're going to need, this, or this, and he could probably set it up that way. We had full comms. We were able to call in fire on insurgent positions as we left the alley. And it turned out that it was very helpful to have the Apaches. We ended up burning up one set of Apaches and having another pair come on station. So we had 4 birds that day.
Mm-hmm. And did everyone get out okay?
Absolutely no casualties. We had no casualties through any of that except the tires on the truck and glass and what have you.
And describe this neighborhood. You said that when insurgents move in, locals move out. Can you describe what this neighborhood was like?
Yeah, the problem, Al-Fadl as a neighborhood was one of the oldest parts of Baghdad. It was on the north side of the river. It had issues of medical care, sanitation, food delivery, electricity delivery, that type of stuff. And we had met with several of the residents on a previous drive through the neighborhood, and the insurgents saw that, well, as a place that they could exert their power. So they moved in and took over and displaced the residents, which is why we were having the firefight in the first place. And then we just did what we could to clean it up. Now they were close enough that our Iraqi counterparts were doing their job. They were going in and talking to the neighborhood. They were promising them different things. And in fact, a week after our firefight in the alley, the local leaders came to the table and started to negotiate. So evidently, between our rescue of the Iraqi privates and the Iraqi efforts to help us and to step up to the plate, so to speak, made a big difference.
That's good to hear. Can you explain the Quick Reaction Force, what that is?
Yeah, a quick reaction force, or a QRF, is basically a standby unit that's larger than the element that you would normally send out on a patrol. They're there in case the patrol or the operation that you're sending out has a problem, runs into difficulties, or gets ambushed, for instance. Then they are basically the cavalry. They're going to come in and they're going to add their weight and pile on to make a decisive decision in your favor, hopefully.
Did they help in this firefight at all? Did you call them in?
Our QRF, our quick reaction force, the Iraqis, actually came up with us. The original operation was only a battalion size operation, the battalion MIT and one Iraqi battalion. So we got the brigade quick reaction force out with us and our brigade team of our 3 trucks, and between the 2 sets of us, yeah, we did make a very big difference.
And after working with the 1st Division on Operation Iraqi Freedom, what is the core message you would like for people to know about MIT and the mission?
Well, the core idea that I'd like to propose about the first ID's military transition teams is that it was a mandated mission. I don't know that anybody outside of the Special Forces community would have embraced it as well as we did. We were given the mission. We were given an excellent organization to be under in order to support us to execute the mission. And most of us, I don't think, would have had it any other way.
In the exhibit, we have a MIT poster artifact case where they'll be rotating the posters. Did you train at Fort Riley, and did you guys make one of those?
We did train at Fort Riley, where our team was the last team to train at Fort Riley before they changed training to, or not Fort Riley, I beg your pardon. We trained at Fort Hood, last team before they changed training to Fort Riley. We did not do any posters. We do have a team picture of 3 of the teams, at least, that we deployed with.
What would you like people to know about your service, Jack?
I would like people to know about my service in that I served with the Big Red One twice. I was honored to serve with it twice. I said at my retirement ceremony, and I still believe it today, that it was a heck of a ride, and I would do it all over again.
Okay, thank you. Were there any superstitions or rituals that you or your unit did before a mission that you can tell us about?
There's really no superstitions or rituals other than I nagged everybody to remember to do their preventive maintenance checks and services so the trucks wouldn't break down.
I think you take great pride in your trucks.
I had to turn wrenches on all them things. Yes, I did take that was what was going to get me back home. I had no desire to walk with 80 pounds of body armor and weaponry in the Iraqi heat anywhere.
Last night, Paul talked about part of the exhibit where there will be a display of things soldiers carried. Was there anything that you carried with you?
There was. I carried several little items. I spoke to Mr. Brewster last night, and there's a couple things little talismans that I carried in my pocket the entire time that I was over there. One was basically it was like a St. Christopher medal. Of course, I had my dog tags and everything else like that, and I had a Swiss Army knife that my son helped me pick out when he was, oh Lord, about 3 years old. And I had carried that to Bosnia with me for good luck, and I also took it with me to Iraq. The other good luck pieces were loaded with bullets, so a little different.
I have a couple straggler questions, if you don't mind. So you had a lot of this new technology, as you know, with the surge, they started using these different forms of intel, and you know, what was it like? How much time did you have to train on it? And
None.
so what was it like learning all of this stuff in the field? Was it trial and error? Was it just
The new technology, they didn't really field us any. The surge brought in Stryker vehicles, which we didn't have. Kind of wish we did, because they were more IED resistant. Intel-wise, we didn't see it down at our level that much. IEDs, they did a lot of stuff with that, but we could download that off the internet or call the task force and get whatever information we needed. You have to remember that most of us were at the end of a 20-year Army career, in my case 30-year, and we'd seen different technologies and multiple sets of uniforms and weapon systems come up, and we were trained on our weapon systems as well as the Iraqis, since we were going to be working and fighting with them. And nothing really was a surprise. It was just evolutionary rather than revolutionary.
But you had there was a lot of Russian, training. There was a lot of they had kind of been inspired a lot by the.
Absolutely.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
The reason that there was so much Russian influence in the region is basically because the Russians have been trying to subvert the Third World forever, since World War II. I went over in 2006 and 2007. The British pulled out. They had a protectorate in Iraq for a while. The Soviets moved in to fill that gap with Soviet weaponry, cheap, Soviet advisors, Soviet training, Soviet doctrine, that type of thing. So the Iraqis had a mixture of, especially in their staff section, between the British way of doing things and the Russian way of doing things. They also had all kinds of Soviet equipment, tanks, artillery, all their stuff. None of it was from the British era. It was all since upgraded into the Soviet system. So they naturally had to use the Soviet doctrine to work that. As far as working against it and pulling intel off of it, we've been training against the Soviet threat ever since I came in the military in 1977. It was second nature just to go into that and learn intimately their weapon system. This is an AK-47. This is a PKM. There's a PK pistol. Here's a Dishka. We didn't really get into the armor side because we were a light infantry unit as Iraqi advisors. But the reason the Soviets had all, or the Iraqis had all Soviet stuff, is because the Soviets basically sold it to them for pennies.
And you've talked a lot about leadership. You've talked a lot about the IEDs. What was the percentage of violence that you experienced? I mean, was it every day? Tell us a little bit about that. And were your soldiers scared? How did you manage all of that?
I think that the percentage of violence that we saw, somebody once said that war is 90% boredom and 10% sheer terror. That's probably correct. That there was a lot of funny things that we were able to see and experience, and just jokes that we pulled on each other, and things that happened that take your mind off of it. Being scared, absolutely. When somebody trains you on how to kill people with different kind of weapons for 3 months, and then you go into a new environment where you're stuck in the middle of a sand desert, reminiscent of the scenes in the Hurt Locker movie. That white light in that movie is exactly like Iraq. I'm sure everybody was scared. Nobody put on their body armor and radios and personal locator beacon and all the protective gear that we had to wear without thinking, I wonder if I'm going to come back today. But we had a mission to do, and we're all professional enough and mature enough to realize that if we didn't do it, somebody else was going to have to. So we needed to do it.
What your wife thought when she found out, what did you say, you had 18 months left and you're going to Iraq?
Well, when I got my orders to deploy, I did the math and realized that by the time I would get back from this tour, providing that I survived it, I was going to have 18 months left before it was time for me to retire. And I kind of was thinking about why did they wait so long? And my wife's reaction was, why are they picking you this close to retirement? Can't you stay here and get out of it? And I'm like, that's pretty much unheard of for a career NCO to turn down an assignment. And so besides which, I said, I get to do my job again instead of what I'm doing and where I'm working. So yeah, I think I'll start packing, honey. And she just she didn't have a nervous breakdown, but she wasn't a happy camper for 15 months, the entire length of the deployment.
Were you able to communicate with her while you were away?
We did. We had very good communication, both in when I was in Bosnia in the 90s and overseas. We were able to have internet, a lot of internet connectivity wherever we were stationed overseas in Iraq. We had phone centers, USO phone centers in both in Baghdad and out in Anbar province, and also we had a satellite phone that we could beg time on if all else fails and nobody got a connection. It was very important. So we had very good communications. Then we had mail service everywhere we went as well, so we could send and receive mail and make sure birthday cards got sent out and that type of thing. So it was pretty good as far as morale-wise.
And talk a little bit about Bosnia. What was your mission there? You were with the 1ID, right?
I was with the first ID. I was the non-commissioned officer in charge of the night shift for the 1st Infantry Division Forwards G2 or intelligence section. The night shift basically put together reports sent in by all the subordinate units that were reporting to the Task Force Eagle at the time. We're also responsible for starting at about 4 o'clock in the morning. We had to be ready to brief the previous day's events and anything that we had coming up to anybody from the division commander, the assistant division commander, the brigade commander, and any staff person that wanted a briefing. We had probably a 20 by 20 foot map that we could stand in front of, and we could post our events on the map and then brief off of it. So a lot of time spent compiling information, putting it into a usable report, checking information with the different entities that were in the Tactical Operations Center, was interacting with a lot of different people.
And what year? Just set it up for us. So you went to Bosnia in what year?
I think 97 was when I deployed to Bosnia.
And we've been focusing obviously on Birchco, which
Sure.
is based out of Camp McGovern. Were you outside of that?
I was not. Tuzla is farther south than that. When they convoyed us out into Hungary, when we left Bosnia, we went over the Birchco Bridge during the time of the incident at Birch Cove, I was in the Task Force Eagle Tactical Operations Center, listening to the reports and trying to respond to information requests and trying to keep everybody from exploding.
What do you remember about that?
It was a very tense time. I tried to keep our higher headquarters, who heard about the incident at the bridge, from overreacting. I distinctly remember getting a call and taking the telephone, and the gentleman on the other end from Sarajevo asked me if I needed a spooky gunship over the Birch Cove Bridge. Spooky gunship is a C-130 Hercules with cannons and machine guns on it. I felt that it was a provocation, that they wanted to set us up. And the last thing in God's green earth that I wanted was an armed gunship circling over that bridge. One of their other capabilities is video, but I suggested instead of a giant gunship that they send a couple of Apache helicopters, which also had video capability, and they could get eyes on that way and be less intrusive. So that's the way they went.
So were you communicating with Dave Grange and Jim Greer during that then?
General Grange was there. He was the division commander at the time.
Were you relaying everything to him?
No, I didn't ever go direct. I had a G2, Colonel John Ravino, who was my boss, and there was another captain in between us who was there, and she was kept up to date all the time. She or I would run over and to make sure the colonel was updated. And he finally came over to the talk and was paying attention. He took all the reports and then let us do the brief in the morning.
And I'm going to ask a couple more questions. Just a reminder to look into the Big Red One. What do you remember about peacekeeping? I mean, that was a very different scene. But what do you remember about peacekeeping?
It was different as far as a focus, but I mean, I do intel, so we do basically collection on threats. So we would do that. We would get reports during peacekeeping in Bosnia of they found a pile of landmines by the side of a farmer's field. And was it an IED that we interrupted? Somebody was trying to blow our vehicles up, or did the farmer just plow the mines up out of the field because he wanted to put his spring planting in? You had to make judgments like that pretty much all the time, and you'd get a feel for what was going on in whatever neighborhood. The closest we got to issues at Tuzla at Eagle Base was when we got reports of a mob approaching a certain location, and I had my partner plotted on our map, and turned out that it was about 200 meters to our left as we were standing at that map. They were outside our gates. And that's not what the message said. It didn't say it's outside Tuzla. Tuzla gave us a grid. That was a wake-up call.
Yeah, great. So I think this is where we kind of shift over to this intro media piece, which is when you first walk into the exhibit where we're introducing our mission, our division, and our soldiers. We're looking for something a little bit different because it's your voice and then everyone else's voice is kind of woven together. So we're looking for very short responses to these questions. And starting with looking back at your military career, what are some core ideas you would like people to know about the 1ID?
I would like people to know about the first ID, that it's the premier infantry fighting force in the American Army.
And give me 3 words that describe the character of the men and women in the Big Red One.
Character of men and women in the Big Red One be characterized by duty, honor, courage.
Can you try that one more time, please?
Sure. I would characterize men and women of the 1st Infantry Division with duty, honor, and courage.
And what are some life skills and lessons that you learned from serving in the 1st Division?
From serving in the 1st Division, I learned many leadership skills as well as job skills, enhancing job skills.
And when so you've been retired for how long?
8 miserable years.
What do you miss most about the military? You said everything last night, but give me some specifics.
I miss being with the people since I retired. The Army, after all, is people, and there's so many different people I met in 30 years, and everybody gave something, and I hope I gave something to everybody back.
And when you put on your uniform, what do you feel?
Honor.
So this is high level. Again, it's hard to probably put it in a couple of words, but in your own words, why does the military perform missions around the world?
I believe the military performs missions around the world because of our national character. We want to be that white knight that everybody looks up to.
And in this, so we were talking about your MIC career with the 1ID. That is a little bit of counterinsurgency. It's a little bit of military assistance. Why was that mission important to U.S. interests?
I think the MIT mission was important to U.S. interests because our policymakers decided that we needed to support the Iraqi government in order to enable it to continue to operate as a friend to America, so to speak. The people who normally do that kind of mission are special forces, U.S. Green Berets. They didn't have enough of them, and they couldn't train enough of them in time, so they relied on the MIT concept.
And do you feel that you accomplished your mission?
I do feel that I accomplished our mission. Perhaps not 100%, but we did the best that we could given the circumstances and the culture and the training that we had.
And you talked a little bit about, there were good things that happened and good things you experienced. What was one of the most interesting things that happened to you on this mission? Exhilarating, amusing, one that created pride.
We were able to, during this mission, have basically 2 reviews with people who had never worked or practiced together before, and pulled both off without a hitch, just using the ability and experience of the senior non-commissioned officers that were tasked with putting both of them together.
And what sets the 1st Division apart from other Army divisions?
What sets the 1st Division apart? It's the people and the commitment that the people have to the division. If you're not really in the Big Red One, you're part of it.
And how would you describe your fellow soldiers in the Big Red One?
My fellow soldiers in the Big Red One, they ran the entire range of the American population. Everybody from very intelligent sons and daughters of the elite to folks who just barely got a GED and got in the Army to escape jail.
And who are you today because of the Big Red One?
Because of the Big Red One, I'm a very proud veteran.
And at the core of the 1st Division, what is it all about? What's the esprit de corps, the spirit, the character?
I would have to say at the core of the Big Red One is that it is the 1st Division, the preeminent division in the American Army, and I really go back to duty, honor, and courage. That's what it's about.
And tell us again, why did you volunteer to be in the Army?
I volunteered to be in the Army basically to see about paying off my college loans and seeing where the Army would take me.
And looking back, what is one of your proudest moments?
One of my proudest moments would have been my last promotion. I had the opportunity to have the first time I had my entire family, including my sister and her daughter, present to watch that ceremony. And I was promoted by the Sergeant Major of the Army.
And how has your service changed your life?
Well, my service has changed my life in that I'm a better person, I feel. I have a wonderful perspective of military and civilian affairs, and I was able to retire and do what I wanted to do back down in Arizona.
And you told us, this is kind of an interesting line that I think would be interesting, is you told us you survived by luck, training, and aggressive performance on duty.
I did.
You did.
I'm going to have to write more.
What do you want people to know about your service to our country?
I would primarily like people to know about my service and to the Army and to our country, and that there's nothing you can't accomplish if you persevere and never give up.
And when I say common defense, part of what we're saying in our exhibit is that these are our soldiers and they fight on behalf of us, of our interests. What does that mean to you when I say that?
Common defense? That common defense is a line out of the Constitution. That's why the Army was created. It's why the militias were created. We exist to provide for the common defense.
And do you remember the 1st Division motto?
Duty first?
Do you remember no mission too difficult?
No.
Okay. Say duty first one more time into camera.
Duty first.
And
You realize I was assigned to like 20 units. So I remember the 11th Armored Cavalry motto.
And Paul said this, he would like all of our soldiers to kind of introduce themselves and say, I am Jack Crossman and I was a Big Red One soldier.
I did hear that. I am Jack M. Crossman. I was a 1st Division soldier.
And I am Jack Crossman and I am a Big Red One soldier.
I am Jack Crossman, and I am a Big Red One soldier.
I am Jack Crossman and I was a Big Red One soldier.
I am Jack Crossman, and I was a Big Red One soldier.
And is there anything we didn't ask you that you feel is important to share with the visitors or the 1st Division Museum or us in the room?
Probably not.
Have we covered all of it?
I hope so.
Well, you did great.
Thank you.
I hope so. I think we went through an entire binder.